Welcome to Best of Three. I am Alvin. You are joined today. We've got Torrey Hawkins here with us.
What's up,
Torrey, say
Alvin?
hello to the people. Hey, man, I'm doing great. I'm glad we were able to get together. It's a late night session,
Absolutely. The best
and
kind.
I feel good. It's interesting. And I realize, as we get started on today's conversation, that the people don't know you. The people barely know me. But they definitely don't know how you and I know each other. And it just got me thinking about that we've actually done this before. I have very fond memories of us in Louisville, Kentucky, snowy night, probably either Thanksgiving night or the night after Thanksgiving at
Right.
Southern
Or
Indoors,
both.
or both. It was
Yeah.
definitely both for a couple years.
Yep.
Having conversations like these after all the kids have shut it down for the night, and I think there's no better place for us to have these types of conversations. So I
Right.
appreciate you joining me. Yeah, it's good to be here with you, my man.
Oh, man, I could not be happier. No better host and no better friend of mine for all this. I appreciate you. This is great. Let me know. I'll lead. You'll lead. I'll follow.
Yeah, it's all good. It's all good. It is in the real world here. It is the day after Thanksgiving, in the year of our Lord 2024, and it's a great time of year to kind of, the both all tours have kind of shut it down at this point for the year,
Right.
right? They're on
Right.
mini vacation here. The next thing of note will be like United Cup later in December, and then we hit Australia full thing swinging. So now is a good time in this off season to have conversations kind of at a macro level, right?
Right.
Getting out of the
Right.
weeds of what's going on either given tour, and we can kind of sit back, look at the year as a whole, and kind of extrapolate what we can about it. And you and I were going back and forth about this, and I thought it'd be a great topic of conversation. Is like we just finished a year where Novak Djokovic did not win a Grand Slam, and we had two very young players split the slams, right?
Yep.
So this
I
might
would
start
tell
to.
you that, and if I can jump in,
No, please do. Please
this
do.
this year officially ended an era.
Okay.
We have had two different seasons, two different 10-year periods of a GOAT era. And by GOAT, of course, I'm talking about greatest of all time. And what you may see as the first time it didn't happen, because that's been your reality. My reality is we just saw the finish of a GOAT era in
Right.
its totality. And if we could kind of almost think about this in terms of, for the majority of the listeners, the majority of people out there that are your age, I've got a few years on you, they don't remember the rivalry of tennis that built tennis. And we've been blessed with two great rivalries, one of being Fed and, of course, Rafa, and one, of course, being, unfortunately, no Fed, but more Rafa and Novak, and
Yeah.
all of the other also-rans and all of the other challengers, right, to the title belt. And all I can say is we've been blessed. And the reason why I wanted to talk to you about a post-GOAT era is because you have to appreciate the era you're coming out of and appreciate the tennis that you've seen before you really can kind of understand what you've been through. And you're going to see not a lull, but you may never be blessed with what we've just had the last 20 years in terms of epic matches, matchups, rankings, titles, results. You heard it right here. No one will ever win 20 or more ever again, and let alone 22 or 24, in my humble opinion.
And you're okay. So I think naturally when we start talking about this GOAT conversation, right, we always end up starting with Rafa, Fed, and Novak for this conversation. And I think it'd be healthy for us to even take a step back, flip it around a little bit, and maybe start with what we saw on the women's side first,
Sure. Sure.
and then kind of take a step back and define and maybe use our definitions through the lens of the women's game, right? So when we start talking about GOAT, I think it's all for us. Serena equals GOAT, right?
100%.
So if you could you apply that kind of same thought around what we've seen in the last, let's call it 3 years, and tell me what you think the era is that we're coming out of or coming into on the women's side.
It's a great comment, Alvin. I'm going to tell you right now, Serena last played one of her best. I'm going to say her last good year, in my opinion, was probably 2017, give or take. She was in and out of it after then. Olympia hadn't been born yet. I don't want to get into the weeds of the dates, but what we've now let's talk post-COVID. That may be a good breaker for everybody to understand. You have had, and I'm going to say this without fully checking the stats. There has not been a repeat champion, save for two, in the last 5 years. And that
Repeat champion, as in like has won the same slam back to back, or has won
back to back, or back to in particular, or has won a career slam or a grand slam. Sabalenka and Osaka have been the only two that have been close. There have been more one-time champions in the last 4 to 5 years. You talk Bianca, you talk, you can go to Raducanu, you can go to Bencic, you can go to Ash Barty. I hate to even go that far, and I love Ash Barty.
Yeah, she didn't win as many slams as people assumed she did. With the run she had was actually pretty short.
Phenomenal. And if she had stayed in it, for whatever reason she opted out, she's almost an asterisk in my opinion. But again, stats still show. Now you go back to, there have not been, and I'm going to mention Raducanu as an example, has not even made the top 10 since. So let's not talk about some of the ones that were top 10 that won a slam and didn't reach their own semi or final or maybe even their quarter of that same tournament a year later. So what I'm getting at is, and you have this post-GOAT era Serena. And now and only now can you truly appreciate what Serena brought to the game. I was doing some notes before the show and I started thinking about, and I even wrote you a note that said Serena versus the world. Because Serena, if you think about it, had Serena versus Venus when she first came on the tour. Serena versus Davenport, which is a huge rivalry. Davenport was arguably the best later player at the time. Serena versus Capriati. We all know about the controversial facts she had at the Open and some of the bad calls. Serena Henin. I mean, Justine was arguably one of the best players in the world at that time. One of the best. She was
the Iga Swiatek of clay. 100%. In
the late 2010s, early 2020s or teens. Then you had, after her initial slam early, then she had a strong presence, a return presence with Sharapova. So Serena Sharapova was the big matchup and rivalry. You had Serena and Azarenka, and you had Serena and Osaka, which in my opinion was one of the matches that kind of put the few nails in Serena's coffin. However, Serena was almost 40 years old, a child, if not. And so I say that to say, for the better part of 20 years, late 80s, early 90s for sure, all the way to late teens, early 2020s, Serena kept tennis going. And there is no bigger GOAT than that. When you can transcend generations, and more than any other player in the modern era, Serena is the GOAT. And let me say this, and here we are now, I'm going to say 5 years, it's roughly 3 years, post her absence, and what do we have? Bunch of starts and stops, fits and starts, if you will, of different players trying to assume dominance. So let's be honest, they could not hold her Nikes. My Converse, I believe, is the term that comes to mind.
And so, from my standpoint, right, like when you mention this topic, I started to think, okay, how do I use, because I'm a very data driven person, so like how do I get my head around what we're actually talking about? So I took a look at some of the the Grand Slam winners all the way back to the beginning of the WTA tour, right? So like we're talking 88, 89, the modern version of the WTA tour. So like I looked at it as kind of two different time periods. When you go from like 1998 to 2000, there's a pretty clean break right there. So I looked at that 12 years as like, okay, in that time period of those, 48 some odd slams played, who was winning those slams and what did GOAT look like before Serena ever hit the
Right.
hit the scene?
Right.
In those 12 years, right? You had four in a year in which four different people won a Grand Slam, right? That happened 5 times.
Which is what we're seeing now.
5 times, yeah. It looks very similar to now.
Thank you.
Thank you. There were no instances in which a player won 2 slams in a year, only 2, specifically 2. But we had 8 different years where someone won 3 or more. So my point is, and that was Steffi Graf, right? Steffi Graf won, she did it 3 different times in that time period. Monica Seles did it.
Thank you.
Twice in that time period, right?
Thank you.
Hingis won 3 in a year at one point. So I think we have seen things like that before, but then the clean break being like 2001, in comes Venus Williams, here comes like legit power and speed tennis. And then things changed very differently after that, right?
Yep.
You started, in the 2001 to 2024 space, 12 different times, 12 different years, we had 4 different slam champions in a year.
Yep.
That is parity. That kind of became the new normal, because the only other times where you had multiple slam winners in a year, like it happened a lot, 13 different times, 2 people, someone won 2 slams, and then only twice did someone win 3 slams in a year. Both of those were Serena. And not only did she win 3 slams in a calendar year, she won 4 slams in a row both times. So I think women's tennis, and I say this, women's tennis has changed. I think you almost have to take Serena out of the conversation.
Okay, that's an interesting point.
I don't think you can really compare anyone to her, because what she did, not just when you're looking at the women's side, but what she did on compared to anyone playing tennis,
right,
was insane. I
will interject this, and you have to understand, and I'm going to go back on you right here, because I went through some similar stats, and let me tell you what I saw. Did you know that for Grand Slam singles totals, 2 ladies share 18 each, who happen to be rivals? Most of your fans my age and older will understand automatic. Chris Evert and Martina.
Everett and Martina, yeah.
Right? But now here's what's interesting. In the same stats, this is to help substantiate your point. On the same list, Serena has 23. Over a generation that saw Steffi Graf with 22, Monica Seles with 9, Hingis, who doesn't even register in the top with over 10, right? And now you come down to something as and this is, and I'm searching now. You haven't even talked about the Sharapovas, the Capriatis, the Davenports, who don't think about what I'm saying. Now you understand, she transcended Venus, Davenport, Capriati, Henin, Sharapova, Azarenka. You see what I'm saying? I would even throw a sock in there. So you understand, that's why I agree with your point. She is so far ahead of the rest. And mind you, I'm going to say this. I hope there's no living relative of Margaret Court. But Margaret Court did not do this amongst this level of competition.
Right. And I think that is it's a fair mic drop. I don't want to drop mine, but I think the takeaway is, and I have this kind of working theory that on the WTA side, there's a 3-year peak that every quote unquote great champion is going to have. For some reason, and I don't know why, and this is probably a little bit out of my experience space here, but for some reason, it's harder to sustain greatness longer than 3 years. the demands. I know it's a hard job. I get it. It's a hard job.
I think that is the quintessential area of peak, which
Yeah.
makes the GOAT anything above 5 years.
Right. Right. And so when you started talking about the Monica Seles and you talk about the Martina Hingis and you talk about the Capriatis, when you look at it from a timeline standpoint, it all happened pretty fast. Hingis wins her first in 97, wins her last in 99. Capriati wins her first in 2001, wins her last in 2002. Hidden is one of the ones that's close. She wins her first in 03, but she wins her last one in 07. That's 4 years, right? So it's when you start looking at, like, I think this is what makes Serena's, clear, pretty, I say clear. Serena's stake to the GOAT status is that she did a 3-year peak probably 4 or 5 times and almost got away with the 6th when she finaled 3 Grand Slams before she ended up calling it quits after she became a mother, right? So
100%.
And we're just talking about slams won. She was right there,
And
Osaka had to go through her.
WTA.
Yeah, and Andreescu had to go through her.
Thank you.
So it's this. This could just be a Serena appreciation podcast if we wanted to be. I have all the time in the world for it,
and there should be one.
I got all the time in the world for it. But I think that's
there should be.
Yeah. I think, but to bring it back to kind of present day, like when we start talking about eras, as you mentioned earlier, I think what we're starting to see, and I'm gonna pose this question to you. I feel like we're starting to see either a return to normalcy or level setting of what tennis is actually supposed to be.
I think it's the same question. Level setting, return to normalcy. Normal is a new champion per surface per year. With a different player peaking, all of them are about the same. And then there's the occasional good player that rises, they peak. The tour kind of, if you think about it, in a sense, assembles to take down this top player.
Right.
The top player competes against the field. They match up to whatever weaknesses that were shown, and the next year they come out and show you that they're not fully developed yet. They have the goods to go further, or they don't. And they simply had a great year. Everything, the sun, the moon, the stars aligned perfectly. And we are now in this level where they were at the top at that point in time. And not to say they weren't rivals or they weren't relevant, but they were not what I would have called a true contender 2 years out, which in this conversation nixes them out of GOAT status. But it makes you really appreciate the players that remain relevant for 5 years or 8 years or 12 years, let alone a 20-year GOAT like Serena, which is why I say the post-GOAT era is extremely important to understand, because that GOAT, you don't fully appreciate the GOAT until they're gone. And that's just a statement that I want to make, that I feel like we're going through it now with Novak, Rafa, and Fed. It's just not as fun to watch. You hate to say it. The rest of the tournament is playing out, but you are looking forward to a guy playing his idol. You're looking forward to a guy. When Wawrinka played Fed, you were absolutely watching what could have been a passing of the torch. Both from Switzerland. This guy's got a one-hander as well. Better one-hander.
Everyone
would say, right?
Yeah.
And you're watching who's Grand Slam worthy. Don't give me some new jack guy that's playing well right now. Okay? We're talking about a legitimate, has beat Novak on clay, has beat Rafa on clay. Okay? This is a legitimate champion on the clay. And now he's playing Fed. And when you saw him out-hit Fed on the clay, out-hit Fed on the return serve, you're like, wow, this guy might just, 3 Grand Slams later, you were happy he earned 3.
Right. And I think that's the big, as we transition away from the, the WTA side over to the ATP version of this same conversation, I think that is probably the main difference. There are very few So, I mean, we'll get to the GOAT part of it, but there are very few surprises on the ATP side. No one, and I think this is probably a function of best of 5 in the Grand
Sure,
Slams. Like,
sure.
there's not a lot of, you get that many sets,
Right.
things
Attrition.
are gonna play things are gonna play out to the norm over the course of 7 matches too. Like, you're not
To your
gonna
point,
fake your
though,
way to a slam.
to your point, before we get out of the women, this is, they are a precursor, in my opinion, for the men. There's just not been a Serena for the men. She is so far ahead of her time. So far ahead of, she was Margaret Court with competition. And I say that to
Yes.
say, you look at 3 people that were able to create an era, and you look at one person that connected the eras with Serena. And I don't want to, again, we can table this for a Serena appreciation show, as you mentioned. But the point I'm getting at is that Serena was just that good. And we are coming from, and I mentioned this to you before we got on the air, 3 players that are the best of all time. 66 of 80 Grand Slams. 79 over a 20-year period. I'd like to say 76 because 3 of those were all COVID-induced and people weren't even playing. But 66 of 76, that's a lot of slams between 3 individuals. So, as we segue to the men now, you have to put Serena in a category all by herself.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And
think
then
that's
everybody else.
and that is probably the definition of the GOAT, that we can't even have a conversation with her in it and everyone else, because that's just not fair to everyone else.
Not fair to everyone else.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. I could talk about Serena all day. I think she's the one that she started to get her appreciation, like true appreciation, outside of tennis while she was still playing.
Right.
When people started to realize, well, I guess maybe tennis was starting to get cool, kind of in the 2017 kind of space, and Serena was like a real figure, with not even just in the sports space, but in the entertainment space, and she was carrying tennis on her back with her.
I would tell you it was 10 years earlier. I was on the tour with a few players at that time, and I saw Serena with the cat suit. I want to say it was 2005. And all of a sudden, whatever Serena was wearing became front page news. You started seeing the actors, the athletes starting to show up at the U.S. Open. I was there for 7 years in a row. You started seeing these people show up. I remember bumping into Kevin Garnett on the way out of the U.S. Open, and there was just so many different people. A-Rod, and I walked out. My last Open, I bumped into John Cena. I mean, there was just so many actors, let alone athletes, that were coming to the U.S. Open. I say it to say, who drew them? Well, the men weren't American, right? They were there for Serena. Serena was on an episode of Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. Serena was in movies. Serena, this is when she had her little deviation right in the middle for wanting to kind of get into purse design and fashion. Venus had her launched her fashion line in the middle. They were kind of contemplating retirement, a la, baseball tangent for Michael Jordan and after 94, 95, or whatever that range was when he left after that first championship series. Now you're coming back to Jordan with the next 3, right? That's what I see Serena, only that wasn't 3 years. And mind you, we all understand how Jordan's impact on the game of basketball. Now we're talking about, she did it for the next 10, arguably 13 years after that Renaissance.
Yeah, it's when you put it like that, it's like you start to look at the pace at which she was winning slams, and she never had a Jordan 2-year break. It was people were looking at her sideways when she went a year and didn't win a slam. Like,
thank you.
1 year. There was like 1 year she didn't win a slam, and it's like, oh, Serena needs to focus, and then she'll come back and win 3 the next year. It's very yeah, I think we get 2 more years away from Serena. So we come back and have this conversation, holiday season 2026. And between now and then, 8 Grand Slams will have been played, and I'm gonna venture to guess 4 different people will win at least 4 people. You're thinking 8 people are going to win those Grand Slams. Okay, all right. And we're at that point.
Current precedent holds.
Right. And, and if that becomes the trend, at that point, that's 8 years past COVID, then people are going to realize like, oh, that thing that she did was not normal.
Right.
That was not normal.
To my point, you only appreciate them once they're gone. And that's a lot of things.
Yeah. I mean, we need a little perspective. I think we do need a little bit of time. Especially for when we're talking about general public having these GOAT conversations. I think on the inside, you can in real time, you can appreciate when someone's doing something, one that's different, two that is truly excellent, and then three that is also great.
Right.
You see it.
Yep.
I think that's a good.
It's interesting. I'm going to mention one thing to you, and this is it's funny. It's funny because I was at the Open one year. I want to say it was 2017, 2018. I might get my years wrong. We were part of an RTC regional training center here in Atlanta, and they brought all the RTC coaches to the Open and blah blah blah. I'd been there 3 or 4 years earlier with you remember Jamie Hampson, one of our top girl players, and Jamie reached third in the world. And I was there at the Open 5 years previous, and so I'm walking around. There's all these new coaches talking about this, that, and third, and they're talking about all these new players. And of course, USTA has us there watching all the new young upstarts, Americans they've given wild cards to, and so on. I'm on a court right behind the new courts 1 through 5, which at that point they had brought in almost stands to watch the practice courts on P1 through 5.
P1 through 5, okay, yeah, by the broadcast booth and everything. Yep.
Right, exactly. So the very back side of P1 through 5, there's these matches, and there's almost little mini grandstand courts. And there's this young player that had hair. I can't believe how big her hair was, why she wasn't wearing a hair tie. And there was this Jamaican flag. And I'm thinking to myself, who in the world has come from Jamaica, of all places? And in the corner, there was also a few Japanese flags. And I'm kind of laughing like, this girl's black. I don't care what that Japanese flag says. This girl looks black all day. Now, we're there in the American section rooting on this young lady who was there from Florida, top American junior. And I turned to my USTA higher up, my direct report, and I'm like, dude, what do you want us to do? Are you want us to stat the match? This girl over here in the corner is going to be great one day. I said, I think she's going to be top 10 within 2 years. This girl you got here that we're watching, I don't know if she'll make top 100. And the guy looks at me and he says to me, oh, you've only watched 2 games. She's one of the top young players coming up. I said, God, buddy, I've been watching the game for 20 years. I said, I've watched a lot of tennis, and I've had some players come up. It's clear. When this girl buckles down, our American girl, as good as she is, heavy ball, nice game, clay court game, she is going to be good to get 3 games off in a set off this young lady. The guy comes at me like almost salty. That guy's name is David Ramos. Almost salty at me, like, how can you say that? You haven't watched her. You don't know about her. I said, buddy, you haven't been watching pro tennis long enough to know what I'm talking about. I didn't know Naomi Osaka at that time. I had no idea who she was. I'm watching a qualifying match. But I had been to the Open 10 times up until that time. And I saw the ball striking, the court position, and the shots she was missing, Alvin. I said, that ball, if it had been in, not only is she wrong-footed the young lady, she was 2 shots ahead in the plane. The world got introduced to Naomi Osaka 2 years later in 2018, 2019, whenever her first slam was. I saw her on a challenger on a qualifying match. I went back to the Open, but my last time was there was right before the COVID hit. And I remember talking to the coach, and he sent me this snarky message. Good call on the girl, good call on Osaka. It was kind of snarky / a little bit more, broken clock, twice, right twice a day kind of a thing. And I'm like, and I was kind of pissed at it for not understanding. It wasn't that I called it. I saw it. And I was kind of mad at him to say, shame on you for not seeing it. We then saw her 2 U.S. Opens later beating Serena, in my opinion, her curtain call. And I say it to you to say, you have never seen a faster Serena, a better counter-punishing Serena playing herself. And what I noticed about that match was this girl had modeled half her game around Serena and was just that much better at it. Had a serve, had a return, had transition, could counterpunch in the corners, was steady, was fast. Mind you, went through her own little
Nerves of steel.
Went through her own little, I'm going to call it, mid-career renaissance, right? I'm hoping she comes back like Serena does. Right now, my thoughts are, it's about 20% likely. But anybody can do it. It's Naomi Osaka. Why? Because she is as close to Serena, the real GOAT, as we've seen. And you heard it right here. If she does, she is the only person, in my opinion, that can replicate what Serena did. Now, I say that to you to say, I saw it in a qualifying match. I know there's other players out there. I saw Jessica Pegula 3 or 4 years earlier. Got friends that coached her, got knew her since she was 12 years old. Phenomenal ball striking. We're not talking about hard-working talent and just continue to improve. We're talking about GOAT. And I'm telling you that Naomi is of the conversation. We'll see if she has, in her legacy, if she has the wherewithal to truly be at that level. But you heard it right here. No one will approach Serena's greatness, in my opinion, ever. Certainly not for the next so many 10 or so years. And we can get into the reasons why, in later conversations.
Fair. We kind of started to touch on the ATP of things, and I do want to kind of transition into that. But again, like I said, I could talk Serena all day long. It's a pastime around these parts.
100%.
So, you mentioned earlier 2023 Djokovic winning the U.S. Open was the de facto end of an era, and then we saw it somewhat play out, as such this year with Sinner winning 2, Alcaraz winning 2, both of them going through Djokovic, form of Djokovic,
right.
to get a slam there. I think
38-year-old Djokovic, I might add.
Yeah. You gotta go through them, and Yannick did in Australia. It wasn't pretty for Novak, and then Carlos did at Wimbledon, again on one leg. So I think you do have to add the qualifiers there. But as we
not Carlos's fault at the same time. Not 100% Novak, and certainly not a 28-year-old Novak. Which right. I think is fair to say.
Right. So we've got we can or we cannot talk about the recent news of Andy Murray teaming up with Novak. Let's put a pin in that, and we'll cover that another time. But from the standpoint of GOATs and eras, what say you moving forward from here? Right, we've talked about the collective greatness of the big three and what they were able to accomplish in their 20-year reign over the sport. But when I think you have to look at what happened prior to, maybe from, let's say, 1990 up until about 2004 when Federer firmly hits the scene. To now, 2024 and moving forward. We mentioned that the big three on the men's side were kind of tag teaming and doing what Serena was doing by herself on the women's side.
For sure.
But what do you think that looks like moving forward on the men's side?
As I was going through and doing some research for this, I noticed there was a couple of eras that did not have a dominant men's player. After Rod Laver was the dominant player, he and Roy Emerson had some strong rivalries. I want to say Emerson has 12 slams. I want to say, ironically, Laver has 11. And Emerson in a sense, was not as good as Laver. Laver was known as the GOAT of the 60s, early 70s. Late 60s for sure, won 2 Grand Slams. Ironically, Emerson has 12 versus 11. There is not one champion, including James Scott Connors, that has more than five in the 70s as a whole. Enter in, and there's 3 players that are legitimate players in this level. You're on board. John McEnroe, and ironically, not Mats Wilander, not Jimmy Connors, not Dan Smith, not John Newcomb, not Arthur Ashe, which is my personal favorite, obviously. But I
Same.
say it to say there's not one. Now, guess who? Now, Jimmy has 8. No question. Spanned over 15, 18, some odd years. Now, here's what's impressive. Who was the next major standout champion of that era? We're talking after Connors.
After Connors, but before whom?
After Connors. Now, that's a great point. Before the next go.
I mean, I think it was probably, by the numbers, probably Lindell. Like, Lindell had a full, I think he parked 7 or 8 in there somewhere.
Lindell had 8. Lindell had 8. So who was truly the next GOAT? And this is what we have to start coming back to. Lindell had 8 over the course. Lindell also leads in most finals lost, by the way, which is a whole nother talk show.
Yep.
That's 10, which is a whole nother talk show. But here's the question. Even past McEnroe, as great as he was, did not have more than 8. So here we are coming back to the GOAT. The first player that has more than 8 is one Sampras.
Pete Sampras, yeah.
Who has 14. And that started in 1990. Now, here's why I bring this up for relevance. For a period of about 15 years, I'm not discounting 8 slams in the least. Each one of those players, including Ken Rosewall, including Jimmy Connors, including Ivan Lindell, including McEnroe, including, I don't know if I said Jimmy Connors, but in that level, Arthur Ashe's 3 are no small feat. We are now talking about GOAT. He now has 14. In an era that has Wilander, that has Lindell, that has players of the level, Johan Creek has 2. We're talking Ed Berg is in the same conversation. Now he has 14. What propels him to 14? Now here's what we get at. And there's one Andre Agassi who also has 8, who kind of transcends both the late 80s and the 90s, early 2000s, and in a sense defines Pete. I hate to say it, defines Pete's legacy as a rivalry. And I want to challenge you on this. Is it rivalry based that pushes you? Or is it the player themselves? And I submit the rivalry itself is as much of a push as the results themselves.
Yeah. So I think this is a really good place to spend some time, because I think there's one thing that is what we learned in the 90s with the rivalry between Pete. And so Pete wins his first in 90, and Egbert still picks up 2 more before Pete really hits his stride in 93, right? So it's like Pete, and then don't forget...
It's 2003 Wemby, and then he picks up charge and runs.
Exactly. But then you also had Courier in there who, he jumped in and grabbed 3 more before, like in between Pete's 1 and 2. So I think the thing that we're missing, the thing that is different now from then, you still have rivalries, right? And I'm looking square at how do Alcaraz and Sinner move this game forward, and what is different today than we had when Pete and Agassi and U.S. tennis was really competing for slams. Pete did all that work on 2 surfaces. He got all those slams on 2 surfaces, right? Never really made a dent on clay. So this was the space and time in which we had surface specialty, which I think made it. Pete didn't have. Let's put it this way: Carlos can win any of the 4 Grand Slams.
Great.
He could only win 3 of the 4 Grand Slams. There were other really good hardcourt players, but he
may have been one of the best on grass to have played the game.
Absolutely, absolutely. So he was, I mean, he was a walking Wimby for almost 7 years, right? But then
It
again, so was Federer, and then again, so
was
was
Borg.
Novak.
So
Hey,
was Borg.
hey, Novak's right there. Novak has, so is he tied with Federer for most Wimbledons ever? Something of that nature. If not, he's right behind him.
So
But any,
number of wins, I have it pulled up here. 41 wins, Wimbledon for Bjorn Borg.
Mhm.
40 for Federer. 34 for Novak. Rod Laver and Pete Sampras are tied at 31.
Okay.
There's your numbers.
So I
Which
think
helps
that,
you appreciate the 5 Wimbys from Borg at that time at a whole nother level. Not to mention the other years before and after.
so when I'm when
76 to
I'm
81.
there you go. When I'm looking at Pete's, the bulk of Pete's run though, from it's a 7-year window, right? Which seems like a flicker of the eye when you start talking about the big three who did it for almost 20 years, right?
Percent.
We're talking about 7 years, so we're talking about a difference in length of careers, right? So that's Novak's going to play twice as long as Pete did. Pretty close, right? Same thing with Roger, same thing with Rafa, right? So more time to get that work done. I think we can't have that conversation without talking about, I'm going to use advancements in technology which allowed for those kind of the court specialties to kind of normalize, right?
Okay.
This is what lets a guy like Rafa be able to turn around and do what he's doing on clay and then come and make that work at Wimbledon. Not to mention they slowed the courts down, right? So I think there are some things there that the opportunities probably weren't as great then, but you also have to say, the competition. Actually, I'm going to push that question back on you. Was the competition better in, let's say, when Pete was winning his Grand Slams compared to what we've been looking at since, I'm going to say 2020, or at least coming out of the Big Three era, because I sort of have thoughts, but I want to hear what you have to say first.
My thoughts go back to, let's start at the beginning of that era. Pete Sampras came on the air in 1990, give or take. If memory serves, he won the U.S. Open right at 90 or 91, if I'm not mistaken.
90.
Pretty sure it was 90. Came out of nowhere, in most people's minds. So I look back to who was there before. You had Lendl. You had Edberg. You had Grand Slam champs, right? You have some of the best players. You have the peers who are still arguably ready to play at that level. Mats Wilander, at that level. You have Boris Becker still playing at that level, who was anybody's nightmare draw, on women especially. You have, at 1990, some of the greats still playing. You know what I mean? Including John McEnroe, including others who are still at that level.
Mm-hmm.
So you're now at a point where you're saying to yourself, let's not forget some of the best of the game. Pat Cash is coming down. Pat Raptor's coming up. I mean, there's players who have won slams who are at that level, right? So there's a lot of different talent, which to me also speaks to, and this is another talk show, you're talking about players that were good. Dare I say great, just not GOATs. And so now you're in a point where we'd be remiss to talk about one of the best big servers, lefties, Goran Ivanisevic, who only won one,
Right.
but was arguably one of the best players.
He was there.
Right there. You got a guy like my main man. Who was the big tall the Dutchman?
Richard Krajicek.
Richard Krajicek.
Yep.
Who won mid-90s. These players are not terrible. These guys, and that was one of the one-off slams where people happen to beat each other on the way. So you look at the 90s as this era where people are moving into, to your point, technology, fitness, tactics. And Pete's got he's got an 85 square inch pro staff with lead tape that weighs, I think one person told me it was somewhere upwards of 400 grams.
Jesus.
Almost 18 grams.
Hurts my
with
shoulder
gut,
just hearing that.
right? So you got to understand, isn't it ironic that a guy who was almost a throwback is playing with an old school racket with VS gut and wins 14? So to your point, was it technology or was it hand-eye and skill? And was it just absolute feel? And he was, in a sense, a better version of the Johnny Mac of years of his
Well,
old era. And that's where I'm
I
getting.
bring up the technology to say that the technology that was allowing those players to succeed on play. I'm looking at the Carlos Moyes. I'm looking at the Gustavo Curtins, right?
100%. Three French in a
Even
row.
like the Spanish Armada of like Juan Carlos Ferrero, Albert Costa, like
For him,
these guys.
Costa and for
Yeah, yeah. These guys, if they were playing later, I think would have been able to do more damage on other surfaces that your polyester strings allowed them to then carry, like, what they could do on clay over to another surface that hadn't quite happened yet.
I think the real question you're asking
is correct.
Your timing is correct. I think what we're really starting to get into is what defines the GOAT is who his competition was. I'm going to go off on a limb, and I don't know Bill Tilden. I don't know Don Budge. I don't know that era.
Yeah.
But I will say that I don't know their competition. And I will admittedly say I don't know. So therefore, maybe I didn't. And I know Bud Collins, when I was on the tour, I had many conversations with Bud and his colorful pants and his very inquisitive mind, and he's a walking tennis historian. But Bud Collins may be one of the few people who was around who knew the level at that time. I will say for myself that they did not have, Big Bill Tilden did not have the competition that Pete Sampras had. Don Budge did not have the competition that Andre Agassi had. I will say that Roy Emerson and Rod Laver were starting to get into the rivalry era. And this is with Pancho Segura, Vic Satius and others who were starting to become good. Tony Traber. We're starting to get to the level where guys are starting to really get good. John Newcomb, Stan Smith, all these players that are starting to, in the 70s, starting to push themselves to become some of the top players. Guillermo Vilas, who I think is one of the most underrated players of this whole era. We're starting to get guys that, to your point, are good on certain surfaces. And now you then get a GOAT who's winning Grand Slams, to your point, on certain surfaces. But isn't it ironic that the fastest surface of grass and the slowest surface of clay has won Bjorn Borg, who won, if I'm not mistaken, who won six. I want to say Bjorn Borg won 5 Wimbledons and 6 French. So he won 11 on the 2 very most different surfaces of all time.
Yeah.
And you got to keep in mind, Australia used to be on clay. U.S. Open used to be on clay. Right?
Okay.
So you got to kind of put this all back in perspective. As the tour was changing, these guys weren't surface specialists. The tour changed the surface. Forest Hills is on clay.
That's a good point.
I say it to you to say, they didn't pick the surface. They didn't say I'm better on this than the other. The tour changed the surface, and they chose to play the tournament. So now here we are in 1990, when we have an official, true, different hard court in Australia, Rebound Ace. You got true clay and red clay. You got true grass. You got true hard court. Yeah, now you can say there's a different surface of all 4 of the slams. And guess who happens to come out on top with this 14? It's one Pete Sampras. So I say it all to say, isn't it funny how we have an expression I'm sure you appreciate in the brother community, game recognizes game.
Game recognizes game, yeah.
So what is it? Did they pick, or did they just happen to play the event and just let the cards fall where they may? So that's my issue. That's my statement back to your question about, was it surface and was it surface specialist? Rafa Nadal, this is another tangent. Rafa Nadal spent 8 to 9 years not getting past the second week. He did not enter the second week of the U.S. Open from 2003 2010, 2011. Not one time. He got beat second round, third round, fourth round. Never made it to the second week of the U.S. Open when he was doing his streak of the French. Think about that for a second. What he did to change, adjust, improve his game, and he's got how many? Let me look it up. How many Grand Slams on the U.S. Open? I'm pretty sure.
1, 2, 3, 4, 4, 4, 5, 5, 4, 4.
Look him up.
I'm missing one. I'm missing one in there somewhere.
I'm going to tell you that 4 U.S. Open, ironically,
to pick up 2 Australians.
Look at it, had to be 2 because my chart stops at 3. So he has to have 2.
Yeah,
he has to have 2, but he's got 14 French, and of course, just so we understand each other, that's the level. That's the level. So
talking about tangents in Rafa Nadal on the Australian Open, probably 2 of my favorite finals, but definitely one of the greatest back-to-back set of semifinals and finals victories that I've ever seen was Rafa Nadal in 2009 at the Australian Open, where he goes balls to the wall against, was it Verdasco? He beats Verdasco in the semis.
Yep, Fernando.
5-setter.
Yep.
Roger goes, I don't remember.
Partner and good friend, by the way.
Yeah. And
both lefties.
Roger with a pretty easy semi, and then they meet in the final, and then they go 5, and Nadal still outlasts him. I was like, this was in my diehard Fed days. I was like, okay, there's no way. My man just played a 5-hour semi. Like, you had to roll him off the court. He's not going to be ready to go. There's a quick turnaround too. No, yep, right there for it. That's the quintessential greatness of Rafa Nadal.
And was getting better at every match. And this is where we really come back to greatness and the building of a GOAT. One of the questions I will pose to you is, let's picture the Olympic rings as symbols as abstracts, as quantitative, call it what you will criteria. What are the 5? And now you get to gain physical skills, right? Actual strokes. You come down to mental. We're talking everything from their mental, what drives them, their hunger, their work ethic. On the bottom right side, you have what I call execution in the moment. What I call, player intangibles, right? Execution. And then on the top right, you have what I call just hunger, will, drive, driven to be. In the middle, you have just this little bit of tennis genius that can just see and just for whatever reason, and just sees it at such a high level. It's the same thing that separates top quarterbacks, same thing that separates top boxers, same thing that separates top soccer players. The game is in slow motion for them for longer periods of time. That's my 5 rings. What did the other players at that level, Fernando Verdasco, not have? What did a Gordon Ivanisevic not have enough of? We can always see he was a little crazy, but the dude was 6'6", 6'7" with a monster with 145-mile lefty serve. You know what I'm saying? What did Raptor have for just a length of time that was better than everybody else? And that's, to me, really where, if you really wanted to kind of, and we may never have those metrics and the ability to quantify them, but you now then measure them against other greats, like the Lindels, like the Max, like the Agassiz, like the Samprases, and now, of course, we're talking about the top 3. And now, buddy, you are in a whole different level of tennis with, of course, Rafa, Fed, and Novak. So that's my 5 rings. What, in your opinion, made those? What are your 5 rings, and which of them allowed these players to truly propel themselves to the top of the game? And that's a big question.
I think that is a big question. I don't know if I'll be able to come up with 5 rings one on the spot or two that are better than the ones you provided, but I will say that take it away from the player and what does a GOAT career make? And I think a lot of it has to do with maximizing opportunity.
What makes a GOAT? And I think, and that's
well,
really
I think the
where I'm
five
getting
rings
at.
is the five
Right.
rings is talking more so about what makes a GOAT. But
Right.
I think that when you started to talk about him, and you mentioned the Goran Ivanisevic and you mentioned the Pat Raptors, I think in that time period of 1990 to 2000, there were a lot of guys that could have. Pete got 14. If it weren't for the Raptors and the Katholikovs, the guys who reached up and got one or two, Pete could have had 20, right?
100%.
And I think what we're talking about here is the opportunity. If you look at 90 to 2000 and then you look at 2020 to 2030, who else is there? It's who else is there to get in the way, because we touched on this briefly earlier, but we always look at the big three as one conglomerate, right? One of those gobstoppers that are just mixed together. But when you really zoom in, right, there were windows within those 20 years where those guys were doing different things, right? Roger comes out of the gate from 04 to 07 and just starts, I'm winning 3 slams a year. Like, of those 4 years, he won, was it, I think it was
9 of
11
12.
slams.
9 of 12 in the first 3 years.
In the first 3 years, before Novak even showed up, before Rafa knew how to...
06, 07, I want to say maybe even 04.
Yeah, it was 04 he won 3,
06.
05 he won 2, 6, 7 he won 3. So this all happens like lightning fast before Rafa even figures out that there's tennis played not on clay, right?
Thank you.
So that is its own 4-year window before we even, this is when it's a big 2, right?
Right.
And then Novak enters the scene. Things start to even out a little bit between 2008 and 2012. You have Andy Steele winning there. Delpo picks up a U.S. Open, but it's still mostly Wawrinka did get one in there as well. But it's mostly Roger, Rafa, sprinkle in some Novak, and then Novak goes gangbuster in 11, wins his 3, and now we're shifting.
What I call the second part,
second part, right? Now this is the true Novak versus Rafa space where Rafa can't beat him anywhere that's not the French Open. And then I think about 2015 is where it gets a little, actually 2014 is where it gets a little crazy. And you have, for the first time in 2012, 2014, those are 2 years where you have 4 different slam winners, right? It's like, whoa, okay. We've got Federer with his, at that point, sitting at 17. But now Andy wins his first. Novak's on 5. Rafa hits 11, right? Andy comes back, picks up another one. Novak picks up another one. And now we have this is when we start talking about the big 4, right? Mm-hmm. Andy's popping in that conversation, and just as quick as he showed up, he's gone, right?
Same with Stan.
Stan picked up his kind of 2 and 3 in that space as well.
I will add to this, because I did a chart on this. 95 to 2004. You can appreciate this. Sampras 14 in that time frame. Agassi 8. Mm-hmm. In that conversation, Puerton 3, Staffen 2, Hewitt 2. 2005 to 2014, Fed 16 of his 20, Rafa 14 of his 22, Nole 7 of his future 24. During that time, Murray 3, Wawrinka 3, Cilic in order, Gaudio 1, Del Potro 1, Gaudio 1. 2015 to 2024, Nole 17 of his 24, Rafa the remaining 8 of his 22, and Fed, which is not to be discounted, the remaining 4 of his 20. Alcaraz, again, talking about 2024, 4, Sinner 2, and of course you have Thiem and Medvedev each with 1. Now, you understand that's 2024. If you were to take out COVID, which knocks out Thiem, and if you were to take out 2024, take 2 off from Alcaraz, you have, of the 76/72 without COVID, 66 of the 72 or three players.
Right.
And that's
but when you talk about recognizing the greatness in real time, I think we also have to recognize, like, take the information we have available to us now, knowing that that 15-year, 20-year run of the big three was not 20 years of the big three against each other all the time. It was Federer by himself, more or less, in the beginning.
Sure.
Then Fed and Nadal.
Rafa came on.
And then
right,
all three.
Right.
And then at some point Fed falls a little bit, and it's Rafa and Novak. And then this is the part where it gets tricky, because then it was Novak all by himself. Not all by himself. Rafa was still getting his French Opens here and there, but between 2019 and 2023, Novak essentially pulled a 04-07 Fed. Right, I'm just gonna take 2 or 3 of these a year until anyone stops me.
After Fed retired, mind you, and Rafa was hurt. So make no mistake, we're taking nothing away from Novak, and he spanned generations. So we're on the same page. I think we're going back to, in my opinion, 2 crucial questions you asked at the beginning. Who are the GOATs? What made them the GOATs? Okay. Number 2, the post-GOAT era, and we started talking about Serena. Post Serena, we've now had several Grand Slam champs in the meantime after her. And I think that's what really helps me understand how you can appreciate greatness until greatness is gone. Should Rafa Nadal retire, and in likelihood he will retire here fairly soon.
I think he's had the ceremony, Davis Cup.
He's had ceremonies. He's had this, second, and third. Fed retired a few years ago. And On Cloud is 100%, the better because of his retirement. Now you have Nole, which I think Nole will probably retire, in my opinion, within the next year and a half, if not year. He's trying to push it to the physical limits of his body, and he's going to pull what Serena's trying to pull, and trying to beat the top. He's trying to beat Big Tilden and Bill Tilden and Margaret Court. He's trying to win that 25-26, and if he gets there, great. But let's be honest, if he doesn't do it, he's still the greatest of all time. The point I'm getting at is that we are about to enter the next 4 years of a Sinner, Medvedev, Giovanni. I'm gonna throw a boy in there. I think he's gonna have one. You're gonna have Alcaraz. You're gonna have Sinner. You're gonna have Medi. You're gonna have 3 other players, soon to be determined, are going to win the next 12 Grand Slams over the course of the next 3 to 4 years. Like we've seen the girls' game, the women's game, forgive me, in the sense post Serena. You're going to see the Raducanu. You're going to see the Bencic. You're going to see the Kvitova. You're going to see the Bondruskas. You're going to see all of the, in a sense, come out of the woodwork on the surfaces that they prefer, on the various things that they're good at. And unfortunately, you're not going to see them return much. It used to be, before these guys, winning 3 Grand Slams meant you were really good. Brereton was a clay court master. Thomas Muster, who Nadal beat his record, had like some ungodly number, like 40 weeks, 50 weeks on clay, unbeaten, which is like 3 years in a row unbeaten on clay.
Yeah.
Right. So you're talking about these kind of players. Raptor, on the grass, Forrest on the grass. That used to be benchmark before these guys came into conversation. So now, in my opinion, what we're about to see in the post-GOAT era, we're about to see 3 to 8 different champions over the course of the next 3 years, is what I see.
This is where I'm going to push back on that. And this is part of I think this is part of what GOATs do, or what we saw the big 3 do. They swallowed up generations of would-be champions that were not worthy of winning Grand Slams. The Kei Nishikoris.
That's a big statement.
The Grigor Dimitrov's generation. They also took the Tsitsipas's generation, right? 3 consecutive generations of, okay, if we lived in a world in which a player only played for 10 years and then they retired because they got to age 28, 29, 30.
Right.
And they just went away. There's another generation that's supposed to step into their place. Doesn't matter how good they are. Someone's got to win these Grand Slams.
Literally, somebody's got to win this championship.
Somebody's got to win it, right?
Right.
Unless the guys just don't leave and say, you know what? You're going to have to beat me first, and I don't think you're good enough.
Right.
I'll just stay here, and when you prove it to me, I'll leave. And that's why your Sagas didn't get any championships. That's why Roddick only got one.
Only got one.
That's
the problem
why
you're saying only one. You say only one.
Only one. Hey, if you want this Grand Slam, you're gonna have to rip it from my cold hands. And this is why I don't believe we are going to have 3 to 8 different winners of Grand Slams over the next few years. Is because I don't think these guys have it in them.
Why?
I believe they haven't, unless there's someone coming out of the woodworks that I have not seen yet. Right? Are the one that you think should win one would probably be Alexander Zverev. My man's been out here for a minute.
His window's passed. I'm sorry to say it.
His window, in my personal opinion, Grand Slams are taken. They are not given.
Agree with that?
Outside of that 2020 U.S. Open, where a team literally just, hey, guess who else was there? Guess who else was there? Exactly.
Yeah.
His game style really matches that to a T too. He doesn't want to go take anything. He's like, I'll be here. If you drop it, I'll be here. But there always seems to be enough greatness around to not drop it. He can get to a final. Right? He'll do what he's supposed to do.
Question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Here's my question. Because you brought up 2 very crucial points. Given, earned, not given. And you also mentioned that weren't worthy. I would tell you, and I'm gonna push back. Isn't the not worthy more about the player who transcended your sport, who's on the other side of the net from you?
Absolutely.
I often go back and forth with my brother on this about basketball. I'm a physical relative of Karl Malone, who was one of my favorite basketball players. I played small forward and power forward in college, and Karl Malone is a relative and one of the best to play the game. Karl Malone deserved an NBA championship. Him and Stockton perhaps perfected the give and go more than any twosome in the NBA. Karl Malone never won an NBA championship.
Mm-hmm.
Karl Malone just so happened, as if he happened it himself, to come up in an era of the Los Angeles Lakers, the Boston Celtics, the Chicago Bulls, and the Detroit Pistons. So he was not going to win one because his team wasn't as stacked as those teams were. I was at a 4-star Nike camp years and years ago when John Starks and other players were there at Oklahoma State. John Starks was one of the best point guards for New York, for the Knicks. Why was he not a NBA Finals and NBA championship player? Because he was in the same era with the same guys. It's, to me, Becker would have won 7. Pete could have won a few more. Quite frankly, I feel Pete won more than he should have in 2002. You look at guys like Edberg should have won a few more. Even Isvich, for darn sure, should have won 3, if not 4. You look at
Roddick probably should have won another 1 or 2. Yeah.
Juan Carlos, and don't get me wrong about who I feel was a player who really got caught in that era. Guillermo, I just had his name. Argentina, not Cañas, but
Korea?
Guillermo Coria. Coria,
yep.
To me, was, in my opinion, a better Juan Carlos. And you haven't even got me started on Morant Stafford, who I think should have won 5, 6, 7 easy.
Yeah.
If he had just been in the right mental space to do so.
Man.
So, worthy? I'm not sure I'm going to buy worthy. What I am going to buy is they weren't at that time top of their game, in the right headspace, playing the best tennis, you name it, which is no fault of the champion who won it that year. Now, why I say that? is that this also makes the GOAT. The GOAT decides that this game, you're just not ready for the history book. You and I are both from Atlanta, at least you from Atlanta. I've been here for 30 plus years. I feel I'm from Atlanta. The Falcons and the Patriots years ago. There's no reason the Falcons should have lost that game.
Yep.
Why did they lose the game? Because the Patriots knew they didn't put them away and had been there 6 times previous to know you don't have what it takes to win this. There is a part of this that speaks to your point. Are you worthy to win this? We're the benchmark. We don't deem you worthy. And there's a part of this that says, you're good. You're not that
You're not
good.
great. You're not
And
great.
you're not good enough to be great on great's bad day. And that's where we come to this rivalry and the GOAT and the whole conversation. No one misunderstands the Patriots being a great team and a dynasty. No one misunderstands my Chiefs just today won another nail biter. Right on, now 11-1. Off of what? Miscue in the game. But wasn't it really the pressure of beating the top team and defending Super Bowl champs? So are you ready for that moment? Now, I said to say it, and I'm a very harsh Chiefs critic. Anybody will tell you, as much as I'm a fan. I'm from Kansas, so I deserve to be. I have the right to be.
Absolutely.
But I said to say, and I'm a fan. I'm a fan on our best day and our worst day. But I said to say, back to our conversation of GOATs, don't the GOATs raise the level?
They set the standard.
Push the standard higher than you thought were needed? And don't the GOATs? I remember being at the 2002 U.S. Open where Pete Sampras was down 2-0, match called due to darkness. Came back and won the match the next day, 3-5. And I say that to say these are against Greg Rusetsky, by the way. And these are the kind of matches. You probably saw a similar match against Joe Willie Tsonga and Novak. I want to say 08, 09 in that range. Match got called to darkness. Novak won the 5th 6-1. 6-1 was getting hit the brake speed off of it. What happened on day 2? Novak was almost chanting on the darkness. Protested for darkness. What happened? Novak won that match. Novak went on the tournament. You get what I'm saying? Now, I hear you on worthy. I also hear you on top. Just no. You're not ready. You're not ready to take this from me. You won't be given this. You won't take it from me. You can take it from me. You can beat me. If you're good enough.
And that's the beauty. I think that is the beauty of the marker that we use for GOAT. We have all decided that it's the Grand Slams that we're tracking, and the Grand Slams matter, especially we can get into the best of 3 free plug versus best of 5 debate.
Sure.
One of the benefits of best of 5 is that it's a long match. You can fluke your way into. You can fluke your way into a set. You might get 2. 2 out of 3 will win you Miami, right? On a good week. Right. But you've got to get
Indian Wells.
Or Indian Wells. But if you've got to get 3 out of 5, you got to mean it. And the beauty of the Grand Slam and the beauty of the way that our sport is laid out is, I need you to do it for 2 weeks, my man. I need you to lock in for 2 weeks, my guy. And that is how we define good.
Can you not?
And great. And then when it gets to day 14 and we're all a little beat down and we're all tired.
A little dinged up.
A little dinged up.
You know what I mean?
Hey, now the royal box is filled. Or
right.
Hey, Rihanna's right here. Where it's the lights are on, everyone's watching. I feel good. I've been here before. How do you feel? You're not ready yet.
Novak is watching, is looking at his poster saying, I'd like to get one more. And other players are saying, wow, I'm playing the guy that's won this 5 times, 7 times, 8 times. And that's a different situation.
That's a whole different situation.
It's a different situation. The real question I bring up, and this is perhaps the quintessential. Does the moment make the GOAT, or does the GOAT make the moment?
I love that question. And I think this is probably a really good one for us to end on, because I feel that we are given these moments. The amount of moments are fixed. We have 4 opportunities a year, and you have to be special within those 4 opportunities every year. So the moments are predefined, but you have to fill it.
Yep.
You have to meet the moment, and that's what the GOATs do. They meet the moment consistently and over time. That is how you go from good to, that's how you go from no Grand Slams to one to five, to good. Yeah.
Great to multi-Grand Slam winner, which is a very key level in between GOAT.
Right.
And multi-Grand Slam winner to GOAT, which to me is multi-Grand Slam winner over time, including over other multi-Grand Slam winners.
Yep.
Which is why I would say the GOATs are truly special, because the GOATs themselves are multi-Grand Slam winners playing against each other, others, and you and I both know, Alvin, if I'm number 1 in the state, and you're number 10, I am your biggest win coming up. I know that, and you know that, even if I'm having a bad day. I have been number 1 before. You may not have been. And guess what? That alone makes me a little bit tougher of an opponent. You beat me 3 times in a row, you become that number 1. And I come at you 4 more times in the back, and you beat me all 3, buddy, you are now the number 1 because you've earned that. You do it 4 more times, you are the GOAT, and I'm just happy to be in the conversation. Isn't it funny? Isn't it funny what the perspective does to change your status?
Absolutely.
Good conversation. I look forward to this.
Yeah,
This is a good volley. This is a good reflex volley exchange back and forth between, at the end of the day, and you don't know who has the better opinion, but you just know that it was a good rally. And at the end of the day, isn't that really what it's about? So I look forward to our next episode.
a wise man once told me you really have to appreciate the way the ball feels when it leaves the racket if you really appreciate tennis, and that's a true exchange. Well, TH, I appreciate the time today. I really look forward to us doing it again really soon. Any last words for the people?
I would tell them one of my favorite quotes / comments is, what is the most important shot in tennis? And it's the next shot. And that transcends life. Next, the most important thing you're about to do is what's coming up next. And hats off to everybody who's been in the rally, been in the game long enough to make what they're doing worthwhile. May you continue. Your legacy is yet to be defined. And your next rally, your next match, your next Grand Slam could be something that people will be talking about after you're gone. And only when you're gone will they truly appreciate you. Give it all you got right now while you have it, because you could be that GOAT in your own field, don't even know it. And unfortunately, the press, the media, and everything else may not give you that same. Give it all you got, because, buddy, you could be that GOAT and don't even know it. And if you are that GOAT and do know it, but those of us who really know, we're watching and we're appreciative, and we are raising our standard because of you.
Absolutely.
There's my last comment.
Absolutely. And with that, we'll wrap it up for today. For those of you out there listening who haven't quite followed us yet or subscribed, do that now. We'll be back in your ears really soon. TH, always a pleasure. Best of 3. We're out.